2,000 years ago, Jesus breathed life into culture when he said, women, children, men at the foot of the cross, they're all equal. And then the Apostle Paul took the implications of that teaching and said, in light of that, here's how family should work. So here's the summary. Here we go, real quick. Children, now we like this one, okay? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Wives, submit yourself to your husbands. It is fitting in the Lord. Wait. But you don't know my husband. Wait, I'm not finished yet, okay? Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Now, why would he say this? Because men in that culture, they were harsh with their dog, they were harsh with their horse, and they were harsh with their wife because she wasn't that much more valuable. And so Paul says, no, that's over. We're not doing it that way. You are to love. You are to not own, not just take advantage of, not look for an opportunity to trade her in. You are to love your wife and don't be hard. In other words, it is not, as a Christian man, it is important how you, I know it seems so old to us, it is important how you treat your wife. This was new. This elevated the status of women, and I know women in our culture, it's like, when it's about time, I know, but you gotta understand, they thought differently. They behaved differently. They functioned differently. Fathers, this is amazing that this is in the Bible 2,000 years ago. Fathers, do not embitter, or if you grew up in church, you may have heard the word exasperate, which is a little bit more powerful. Fathers, do not embitter or exasperate your children, or they will become discouraged. Now, again, for me as a father, this is probably one of the New Testament teachings that I have violated the most. It's always unintentional. You know, and exasperate or embitter means you say things to your kids and you may mean something positive. You're trying to discipline them, or you're trying to encourage them, or you're trying to contrast their behavior with somebody else's. And without meaning to, you just frustrate them. You just place a weight on them and you argue, but what I've said is true. What I've said is true. I'm just telling you the truth, but your words place a weight on them that just causes them to be discouraged. I will talk about this later, but you need to know this. See, women, moms, your words weigh about 25 pounds. Dads, your words weigh about 500 pounds. And men can say the same thing a woman can say, a father can say the same thing a wife can say, and a mother can say, and it feels different. And 2,000 years ago, this is amazing. Paul knew that. And he doesn't say women don't exasperate your children. He says, fathers, I know your tendency. Your tendency is to treat your children like a slave. Your tendency is to treat your children like the men and women you own. Your tendency is to treat your children like your animals. No, your children, remember Jesus said, it's okay to bring the children up to the front row. Fathers, be careful how you speak to your children. I'm telling you, there are so many bad parenting examples where I just wish I could go back and retake the words that I said. And in every case, the words were true, but they crushed the spirit of one of my children. That's in the Bible. That's 2,000 years ago. He understood that dynamic. Isn't that powerful? Husbands, he says, he goes on. Husbands, this is Peter. Husbands, again, Peter who hung out with Jesus and, is trying to figure out how does all this work in family. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Now we think, well, isn't that common sense? Not in the first century. This is very futuristic. In other words, take into consideration how your wife is feeling, to which they were going, okay, you mean the wife that I didn't even get to choose, the wife that my parents bartered for because their best friends had 3 daughters, nobody wanted to marry the middle one, and they gave us a cow if I would marry that woman, I didn't even get to choose her. I wake up one day and they go, oh, by the way, that's who you're gonna marry in about 6 years. You're like, seriously? I mean, nobody was considerate of me. I have to be considerate of her? Peter says, absolutely. Husbands, be considerate of your wives. Look at this. And treat them with respect as the weaker partner and heirs. Heirs. What's he talking about? Not talking about, your family has some money and my family has some money, heirs. No, he's talking about the fact that at the cross, when Jesus died on the cross, he died for your wife. Your wife's not only your wife, she is your sister. You are joint heirs. You have a heavenly father. She has a heavenly father. It's the same heavenly father, joint heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. So here's, in summary, in case you can't come back to the rest of the series, here it is, okay? Husbands, love your wives and be considerate. Wives, submit to your husbands. Children, obey your parents. And fathers, don't irritate your children. Let's close in prayer and be done with it, and that's it, right? Now, here's the thing. Common sense, a little bit, you know. Very idealistic. Very idealistic. And what this brings us to, it brings us to the tension that's going to be the context for everything we talk about in the next few weeks. Because you don't come from an ideal family, and if you're married and have kids, you haven't created an ideal family. It may be more ideal than the one you came from, it may be less ideal, but there's real, and there's ideal, and there's a gap. There's real, there's ideal, and there's a tension. And here's the thing that Jesus did over and over and over and over and over. And if it was ever true of any other area, it is especially true when it comes to male-female relationships, and it is especially true when it comes to family. Jesus did this. Jesus pointed and he taught toward an ideal, and he refused to condemn those who fell short. Now, this is the dilemma, this is the tension, this is the paradox, this is the gospel. That Jesus taught and pointed toward an ideal. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like. He pointed toward an ideal. And in fact, in every situation, Jesus raised the current standard. In the current standard in, first century Judaism was, it was against the law to commit adultery. And everybody knew what commit adultery meant. It meant you took your body and you committed adultery. Jesus said, no, that's not really what that's about. It's higher standard than that. If you even look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery, which meant in that moment, Jesus made an adulterer of every man in his audience, potentially every woman. I'll just speak for the man. Jesus made an adulterer of every man in his audience and every man that would ever read those words. He took a standard and he raised it, to which we would say, oh no, so Jesus, what's going to happen to all of us who have committed adultery in our heart? And Jesus would say, well, I'm going to forgive you. Really? Yeah. Well, which is it? It's both. The standard got higher and the grace went deeper. The standard got higher and the forgiveness became richer. The standard went higher and your inclusion became broader. And this was how Jesus functioned. This was what throws people off. It's why we want to go one extreme or the other. It's why Jesus was the embodiment, as we've talked about, of grace and truth. That he taught people and pointed toward an ideal, but he refused to condemn those who fell short. Now, there's tension there. There's tension there. And the tension for us and the decision that we're going to have to make as we go along is this. Are we willing to embrace an ideal that may never be a reality in our current family? Or will we be tempted to lose sight of the ideal to feel better about where we actually are? Are we willing to embrace an ideal as it comes to family, knowing that we may never live up to it, and for some of us, it's too late to ever live up to it? Or will we do the easy thing and decide, I'm going to lose sight, I'm going to abandon that ideal, and I'm going to declare what's true of me as normal? There's a tension there. Now, the most profound illustration of this in Jesus' ministry actually had to do with family relationships and family dynamics. This is a passage of scripture we've looked at before. I just want to read it quickly, make a couple of comments, because here is the tension that is so emotional for so many of us. Yet Jesus was so comfortable in this tension. And I think those of us who are followers of Jesus in some way, shape, or form have to learn to live with and be comfortable with it as well. Here's what happened. Some Pharisees came to him, Jesus, to test him. In other words, they weren't there they weren't there to learn, they were there to test him. And they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Is it lawful, as in the law of Moses, is it lawful or is it okay for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Now, you need to understand, they had a version of no-fault divorce that you can't even imagine. And basically, it wasn't even a legal document. Here's how no-fault divorce worked in the first century in this Jewish community. If a man didn't want to be married to his wife anymore, he said, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And that was it. No attorneys, no fees, no depositions, no juries, no, taking statements. It's I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. She had to pack up and leave. If a woman wanted to divorce her husband, Too bad, so sad, you're dad. You just couldn't get out of a marriage. I mean, a woman, she had no rights, even in this Jewish culture, she had no rights at all. She was stuck. So the divorce law was real simple. A man could divorce a woman basically for any and every reason. They had heard Jesus teach something a little bit different. In fact, what they heard Jesus teach seemed to conflict with what Moses taught, and they were always trying to divide Jesus from the teaching of Moses so they could, get the people to decide Jesus wasn't who he claimed to be, because if he was from God, certainly everything he taught would line up with what Moses said. So here's what Jesus says. Haven't you read, he says to these very well-read men. What an insult. Haven't you read, he replied, and this is the most important part of the statement as it relates to our discussion. Haven't you read that at the beginning? Now they're talking about the right now. Right now, Jesus, okay, there are people who don't get along, things don't work out, people get older, people lose interest, people meet other people. And so can a man divorce a woman for any and every reason? We're talking about right now in the real world. And Jesus says, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me take you back to the beginning when things were perfect. Let me take you back to the beginning where things were ideal. Let me take you back to the beginning when things were just the way that God wanted them. And suddenly there's the tension. Because if you take me back to what's ideal and it conflicts with what's real, I'm not sure what to do with that tension. And Jesus says, you know what, I'm comfortable with that tension. Maybe you should get comfortable with it as well. Haven't you read, he replied, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one, including Moses, separate. So he takes them all the way back to the Garden of Eden and says, okay, your whole discussion about divorce is kind of irrelevant because you don't even understand what a marriage is. God made these two people one, so when people get married, they become one. And you're trying to unone what God made one, and it didn't work. And they're like, okay, wait. And then it's so funny. They came to test Jesus, and now they're so confused, they say, forget the test. Now we really want some information. What? What? Jesus says, yeah. See, you're looking at the real, you've lost sight of the ideal. And I'm comfortable bringing both of them to you. I understand things don't work out. I understand people get divorced. I understand there's got to be a mechanism. I understand we've got to come up with a way to protect women from men so they don't have all the power. I get that. But I'm not going to lose sight of this, that in the beginning, divorce wasn't the plan. In the beginning, God created it in such a way that two people become one, and you can't unone what God made one. And they're like, what do we do with that? Why then, they ask, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Well, then why did Moses come up with this divorce thing if what you're saying is true? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wife because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. That's tough, isn't it? Wow. What do we do with that? Jesus says, you just carry it. Okay, but Jesus, what are you going to do to all those divorced people? I'm not going to do anything to them. I'm going to do something for them. What are you going to do for all the people who are divorced? I'm going to give my life for them. But then it looks like you're just letting us off. So which way is it? Is it like a rule or is it not a rule? Yes. Yes. There's a tension. Listen, this is so important. There's a tension, and you dare not resolve it. Because if you resolve it, you lose something incredibly important. And this is just one example. As we go through this series, we're going to look at some others. But here's where this lands, and here's where we're going to leave it for today. You see, if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not a Christian, if you're still making up your mind about that, you're kind of wigged out by the whole Bible thing. I get that. And what happened to the dinosaurs? I understand that. And why do bad things happen to good people? We understand all that. I get that. You have ample reason not to ever become a Christian. I would never argue that point with you. And so moving forward in this series, there are going to be some things that are very practical. But if you are a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus is inviting you. In fact, I think Jesus is instructing you and is instructing me to follow him into the complexity of family life and carry the tension between what's real, what I see around me, and this ideal that it seems like very few people can ever actually embrace and attain. And there's a tension there. And so the question is, will we embrace a standard that many of us have fallen short of or will fall short of? Or will we redefine terms so that we can feel better about where we are? Are we willing, in our fallenness and in our inability to reach it, to embrace a standard and embrace Jesus' sense of ideal to say, that's what ideal family looks like, and even though I may never attain it, I'm not going to take my eye off that North Star of guidance as it relates to family? Or am I going to change the rules so I feel better about where I am? And followers of Jesus, we don't have permission, we don't have the margin, we don't have the luxury of dismissing what seems to be archaic, in the past, grandmama's version of family, when in fact, when those ideas were introduced, I can't even exaggerate it, they were revolutionary. And women, they elevated the status of women and children in a way that had never, ever happened in any modern culture up until that time.